Hello everyone and welcome back to another exclusive Patreon tutorial. This time in PTRN103 I will be showing you how to create the procedural pattern on a Fruity Loop. So I'm pretty sure you have seen the render before. I've posted it on my social media accounts, and you can see it uses several different types of displacement. So you can see there's these bigger holes, then there's like these kind of sugar things on the top. And in this video I will be showing you how I created this, or a very similar. I will not go into the full detail on how to scatter all this stuff and colorize it. It will be mostly about the displacement and how to create a very interesting pattern with just stacking different types of noises together. So I would say let's jump right into it. So I have a scene prepared. It is very basic. It's just, as you can see in my outliner on the top right here, it is just the environment light. And now I will just be creating a simple torus, which will be my starting point. And I actually shot some reference of a Fruity Loop, which you can see here. So you can see it's actually very sugary and like it feels very fluffy, and there's lots of holes in it, as you can see right there. So it's I will try to really get this stuff going. So and by the way, I'm using, this is pure reference editor, and then I'm using, for your information, M2A 3.100 and Arnold Core 5.20. So it's a pretty recent update, so be sure to update this, and I will be trying to render it only in the viewport, and we'll see how good we get along with that. Alright, so let's get going. So first of all, I'm creating a torus right here, pretty simple. I'm trying to create it more or less to scale, so I think it's more or less 2 centimeters wide. One cube here is a centimeter, so obviously I would need to scale it down a bit. So I can just do, maybe this is now 2 centimeters in width, and then we can maybe do something like this. Yeah, I think this is fine. I leave the subdivisions where it is right now, because I will be smoothing it anyways at render time. So let's press Alt Shift D to delete all the history. Rename this maybe to Fruit Loop, and let's assign a shader, standard surface shader, and make sure we have subdivisions. So I go right along into the Arnold shape, and then Arnold tab, go to subdivision, enable cat clock, and then let's just go to maybe 4 subdivisions for now. It's pretty high, but we need pretty good resolution for this to work. So be sure not to directly go to 4 in your test scenes. Slowly increment and see what you get from the renderer. Alright, so let's just rename this guy to AI Fruit Loop, and I think we are good to go. So we will be working with displacement a lot, so I can actually already create a displacement shader like this, and let's just disable a shading engine and hook up the displacement to the displacement shader. And what I also like to do for this tutorial, I already create an I think it's AI layer. We can use the float one, so we can stack several ones together, and then the out value goes into the displacement. So on default, we have a displacement value of 0, which is black, so we can do 0.5. And then in the displacement shader itself, which goes into the shading engine, under the Arnold tab, we change the scalar value to 0.5. And for now, let's just disable auto bump and make a bounce padding of maybe 0.5. So the scalar value means values which are 0.5 will not displace at all. Values which go higher will extrude, and values which go lower than 0.5 will go into the geometry. Bounce padding is just a bounding box for the renderer to know how large the object will be after displacement. And then auto bump will use the input texture to create a normalized bump mapping for your renders. So currently nothing is in here. This is pretty basic, so I would expect nothing to happen except the shader assignment. So if I hit save, I'll be trying to save quite a lot, just because I'm trying out the viewport renderer now. So if I go to my view pane, and then I go to renderer tab, and then I can actually render right in here, and I'll get this floating window. which says updating scene. I can just maybe make it smaller, put it in the top corner and hit play, and let's see what we get. We get nothing, which is interesting. It's right here. Why is that doing that? So I just hit update and now we get it. So I can also render a frame. So I'm just selected the frame there, and I can choose just the Fruit Loop itself. It makes it a bit faster to render actually. So try to use that. Alrighty, so let's go to show and disable selection highlighting. So when I click on the object, it will not get selected. Alright, and I like to use the debug shading menu, and I just like to tear that off so I can quickly access let's say wireframe or occlusion, or I'll be working in basic quite a lot. So just make this stuff more accessible. Alright, so now let's see what's going on if let's just create a AI noise, and let's say we connect it to a AI range, and then we have this connection, and from here we connect it to a input, right? And all of a sudden you can see something is being displaced. At the bottom we just had the warning. Let's see if we can get it back if I change the value. Yeah, so it says recommended bounce padding is 0.233 because I just hard coded a bounding box to 0.5. Arnold is so clever to recommend you a value, so we can just go a bit lower, maybe 0.3. It's actually nothing really to worry about. It's just a warning. It shouldn't be too crazy. So according if we check the reference, we can see that there is definitely some randomization in the overall shape of the torus of the Fruit Loop. So my first layer will be a very broad displacement, just to give a different shape, a different pattern for each Fruit Loop. So what that means is I will not add any details. So currently it's on 2 octaves. Let's go back to 1. So it's very subtle. You can see it's way too strong, the effect. So what we can do, we can either go into the range. I would like to not change my displacement scale, so this stays at 1, and all I'm doing to control the values is by changing my range. So this is also on mix, it's all full on. So if I would now do an output max of 0.5 and an input, is that the right? Yeah, and I do this on 0.5. We should get no displacement at all, which is what's happening. So now we can just say, okay, I want to make it a bit larger, maybe 0.6, and it gets a bit larger, and we can do a maybe value of 0.4, and then we have a few places which goes a bit smaller. And if you want to have a strong effect, you can play around with the input min or input max. And if I do isolate selected, you can actually see, it's hard actually to see because I changed the value. So if I go back from 0 to 1 range, you can see now brighter values extrude and darker values go inside. I think it's called intrude, or maybe it's not, whatever. So let's just go back to maybe 0.35 and 0.65. So this is my workable range, right? So if I go back to basic, you can see now the max extrusion value is 0.65 and the minimum dark value is 0.35. So now I can add more detail if I want to, but I think this is actually pretty cool. And for sure we can play around with more values, but let's say I would randomize the time value now. Let's go maybe a time value from 0 to 10. You can see we get different shapes every time. You can see, and this is exactly what I want. So I would just use this time value to actually randomize each Fruit Loop differently. So there in this time slot there would go a random value. So this would be the first step. So I just saved. So let's just call this AI noise maybe foundation or something, or first layer or base or shape or whatever. And this would be that, and we can also, I think, name it in here. So layer 1 is the foundation. It's just to help what you're doing, actually, foundation, like so. And then the next step is like after we, let's just go full screen. So after we defined the broad shape, you can see each broader shape has some ups and downs. It's definitely breaking the silhouette of each fruit loop, and that would be the next step. So the next thing would be I can actually just duplicate this noise pattern and also the range, and let's just reconnect these guys and connect the out value to input number 2 and call this maybe I don't know, silhouette or something. I don't know, silhouettes. And this guy would go into input 2. So right now you definitely don't see anything because first of all the layer is not enabled, and then the mix is also not enabled. So let's just maybe for now go really a detailed one. So let's go maybe 6 octaves. We add some distortion, maybe 0.2, and maybe a scale of 2, and no offset, like this. So this is pretty detailed now, and if I would connect this guy to my shader itself into an ID slot, which I'm just using to actually use the isolate selected function, we can see what my pattern looks like now. So obviously I don't think this will work as expected because it's pretty cloudy and we don't get these nice bulges. So we might actually be remapping this a bit to get something a bit more contrasty in this whole thing. Oh, let's for now just maybe leave it at 0.1 and see what we get. So go back to basic, and now this is connected to AI layer float 1. So let's enable layer 2 and play around with the mix. So if I mix this in full on 1, you can see what's going on. It's slowly being added, and I think it's totally replacing the shape of number 1. So now you can see there's a subtle effect going on there. So the more I bring it in, I think the less this one is there. So if I don't mix this in at all and play this one up, this is now only the shape layer number 2, and if I mix in layer 1, you can see there's actually no difference because only layer 2 is active. So obviously you would dial this in very subtly. So maybe 0.2 or maybe 0.4. So the overall look is still defined by layer 1. So let's call this just maybe detail. So this is actually the way I have worked on to create this render here. So this is exactly the workflow I used to create this guy. So I'm just recreating what I did for the render. So this would be my second layer. So now I want to create another layer which goes inside, and this time I want to use something different. So I will go to the new noise shader called AI cell noise, and if I go to out color and connect this to the ID slot, you can see what this guy looks like. Isolate selected, and so you've got for this guy you have actually several modes. You've got noise 1, 2, cell 1, 2, woolly 1, 2, and alligator. So alligator is kind of this, and it has additive modes, or maybe this one does not, but the other ones definitely have. Oh, it doesn't work because you need different octaves to actually make it visible that you have an additive mode. So if you go to noise pattern 1 and we increase the octaves maybe to 4, you can see that there is something changing, and you can see that now the additive is actually adjusting the look. And now what you can do, you can scale it up. Let's go maybe 4, makes it smaller. Now you can see actually what's going on. If I do additive, you can see all these layers get plus together, and if I don't use it, you get actually this kind of neat bubble effect. So I want to use this, and I want to use this to create these little holes here. So let's see what we can do. So we can, if I would use it like this, they would go outside, like create bubbles on the outside of it, which we don't want. We want them to be going inside. So let's just create a range. And in the range, I just want to invert the colors. So just that you see what's happening. If I do 1 and 0. It's now inverted, so all the black things go inside. And let's just connect this up to my displacement. And for now, I just totally enable number 3 completely, so I ignore all the other ones. And this is what I get. It looks not what I would expect, right? So the problem is just because our ranging is totally different. So we need to have, first of all, let's do output max again, and output min to 0.5 as well. So it's doing nothing. And I think if I go now output min a bit lower, maybe 0.3, was that the right thing? Or the other one larger? Interesting. Oh, I think because I inverted this, and yeah, sorry, my bad. So this needs to be 1 and 0. And I think we need another one just to play around with those values. So this one goes in here. And this one goes there. Okay, so now let's just revert this. Alright, so what I'm doing now, I'm inverting this here. Let's just actually disable this and go to the ID slot. I just want to show you visually what the maps look like before we go into this. So I'm just saving and I'm updating the full scene. And I do isolate selected. So this is the cell noise. Then we invert this and then we put it into another range. So what I can do now, I can actually contrast this up a bit. You can see now the black gets darker, and I want to definitely make my output max. I don't want to extrude it, so this will stay at 0.5. And now the only values which are affecting it is the ones going inside, and we just want to play it safe and maybe a value of 0.3, so we only go inside the mesh of a max value of 0.3. Alright, so now this is connected. Let's go back to basic mode and let's bring back layer number 3. And now you can see what's going on here. You can see you get these nice little holes. It looks like chopped ice or something like that, right? And now we just need to play around with those settings to actually get it working as we want it to. So I just enabled smooth stepping, which is kind of like a clamping thing. So let's see what we can do if I actually, let's see if I go on my input max lower. There we go. So if I reduce my input max, we can actually get a kind of really hard cut of holes in this geometry, right? This is what we want. So maybe value 0.6. Let's go maybe, we can also play around with the bias here and the contrasting values to get a softer, softer holes or more round holes. As you can see, this looks more like cheese now. And if we don't want it to go in that deep, we can maybe try value of 0.4, so it's not going that deep inside the geometry. And you can see it looks pretty cool. And again, we can randomize the values as much as we want to. So we can go to cell noise number 2 actually, and then we can play around with the time modes to, oh, this actually should work. Interesting. Does it need an update? Not sure. I think number 2 should allow us to animate it. Apparently not. Interesting. Well, for now it doesn't matter, because I don't want to show it anyways. Alright, so now you can, the next thing would be to kind of break up the uniformity of these things. So what I figured out, it's not 100% working, but it's working good enough. So if you create an AI noise and you connect the out color to the p-value of the cell noise, we should get something very interesting. If something at all. Okay, so this is now what we're getting by this connection. And you can see this is the broad shape of the noise. And if I play this up a bit, feels like it's not updating anymore. So I always need to hit Ctrl U to force update the render. Now you can see we're kind of breaking this the pattern up, so it looks more like something is eaten out of it, which is exactly what we want to go for. So let's just play up the scale. Maybe let's go for 2 and update again. And now this looks already very interesting, and definitely something we can work with. The only thing is, it feels like it's a bit too steppy, so maybe try 2 octaves. So I'm not like a big fan of these little holes there, so we need to find a way to get rid of those, I guess. Maybe play around with distortion. Definitely does help. So let's just slowly bring in the other maps again. So currently only layer 3 is on, so if I mix it down maybe by 0.2, you can see now we get interesting shapes here. Alright, let's go maybe 0.5, 0.1. So now comes the tricky part. So we don't want to really want to adjust the overall shape by a lot, so we don't want to go higher than maybe 0.2, just because it will really change the overall shape of the fruit loop. So if we use a value of 0.2, we need to get a way stronger effect right here. So currently this is clamped by a value of 0.5, which is fine, but we want to go a stronger in negative space. So a value of 0.2 would give us back a original stronger holes right there, and this is very cool. So let's see what else we can do about the noise thingy. We can try to add a more distortion to this. Maybe not by not going too crazy. Let's try 0.4. Alright, so definitely adding more detail to this whole thing. So let's see what else we can do. We can actually clamp this. We can adjust some values, some more, just maybe, which might be faster if we go to isolate selected from here up there. And let's just do isolate selected instead. And maybe for now just disable the displacement completely. Oops, here. So now there's no displacement, and now you can actually see what's going on. So this is my noise, this is the cell noise, which is resulting from the noise pattern. So if I lock this selection to this node, I can now see what we actually changing here. Alright, so this is breaking this up a lot more. So we just want to have, we don't want these rings there, so I think a value of 1 should be just fine. So now this is going inside the mesh, and if we create just a bigger scale pattern, we might have actually better holes. We need to see. So obviously then you can play around in here, which is adding these loops to the whole thing. So let's just see what this looks like. It might be a bit too much, but we'll see. So let's bring back the displacement and see what the basic render looks like. So this is now the amount of holes we get, and I think this is actually pretty well done. We have all the detail, and the only thing we're missing now is these little sugar objects. And how I created them was using another cell noise. And I will show you if I just disable the displacement and I connect up the cell noise to the ID slot. Isolate selected on, and let's change the mode to be cell 2 and bring up the scale to maybe 5. And you can see now we get these little shapes. And I just use these guys to actually extrude some really hard looking shapes. So this is just randomizing the position, and then we still had to change the scale maybe to 25. Yeah, so these cubes should represent these little sugar things on you, like this stuff there. And obviously we want to play around with the density, so we don't want too much sugar everywhere. So I think we can work with kind of this. And let's see if actually the time would do a trick now. Not really. So I would expect actually to randomize, maybe offset the whole thing. This is something we can definitely do just to get some random values. So put a randomizer in the offset or something. But again, for now, this is not that interesting. So let's just connect an AI range to define the value. So we only want them to go outside, right? Not inside. So our min value is 0.5. And our max value, let's say, is 1. So only the white things get really extruded by a lot. And then we can play around with the input max, I think. Let's see if something's happening. Yeah, so this is just defining the average height. So the lower I get, the more similar the height ranges will be. But we can see this in the displacement. So let's just connect the out R to my number 4 and call number 4 maybe sugar, and mix them in for now completely like this. Value of 1, hit save and reconnect the displacement, and there we go. We get like crazy sugar, which is correct. This is what I would expect. So now let's just reduce the mix a bit, maybe go down to 0.25, and you can see now we still get these little strong extrusions everywhere. So definitely too strong. So maybe 0.1, maybe even 0.05, and this might work. So the next thing what I would do is like increase the subdivision. So maybe go a value up to 5. And now with a value of 5, you get a lot nicer edges here. You can see the extrusions are a bit better. Not perfect, but a bit better. And so the only thing which I'm missing is the overall texture to the whole thing. So let's just play up the detail a bit more. I think we need to update again. Oops, not here. Here. All right, so this is now updating the full thing. And if you feel that the distortion from the base layer is not enough, we can definitely go about to increase these values a bit more. So let's go 7.5 to get a strong shape, and maybe 3 to get a stronger effect there. And again, I still think that my detail layer is not strong enough. So let's just go back and go a bit crazy on those numbers, maybe 0.8 and maybe 0.2. Let's see. Okay, so this is distorting it a lot more, and now we can just easily dial down the amount again. So maybe 0.3. So it's not that obvious, and also for the holes, maybe a value of 0.1. Okay, so I think this is now getting somewhere very interesting, and this might actually look like some Fruit Loop from here. So just to show you how it would look shaded, let's switch back to disabling debug shading, and this is now what it would look like in a lit environment. Obviously, we could add a bit more detail, so let's just do a test and see when I just bring back the auto bump in the shader. So auto bump is on now, so let's see if there's a lot bigger difference. So definitely the sugar elements get more detailed lines, and I think this is just too much. So I like to always disable auto bump just because of these artifacts, and then if I feel I need to break up the roughness some more, I just plug in a bump shader. So let's just pick a color. Let's just pick this green one. Dark green is interesting. So this is how a dark green one would look like, and let's play around with the with the IOR. Maybe go down to 0.4, and the roughness maybe as 0.2 is actually fine. The only thing which I want to do is just break it up some more. So I would just create a AI noise, and oops, what did I do? There we go. And create a bump2D node, AI bump2D, and hook these guys up. So this is the bump map, and this would go to my normal camera slot. And I think if I update the render, I think I also need to change the scale. So let's go maybe 5. Bring in some octaves, maybe 5 as well. See how the map looks like. Looks like this. So let's bring in some distortion. Just some higher frequency noise. We can actually go maybe up to 8 on scale. So it's a smaller detail. Go back to disabled mode. And now you can see actually there's a lot more detail on the whole thing. So if I disable the bump on 0, this is what it looks without the bump. And if I go back to a value of 0.1, you can see it just is a lot nicer. And this is kind of what I did. Obviously the holes need some bit more work, but all in all, this is kind of what I did. Obviously I was using all these procedural maps to also create diffuse textures and scatter textures. So if I would just use this guy, let's make it actually a bit rougher. And then if I use a coat on top, you can see we get this nice coated look, and this should be broken up with a map as well. So maybe a value of 0.3 here, and let's just quickly connect something to the weight. So AI noise again, and just connect this guy up to the coat weight. See what this looks like in isolation, like that. And this should actually be more clamped, so we can do that in a bit. Okay, so if I would create an AI range here, and I just clamp those values a bit, so whatever is black will not get any coating, which is what I want, right? So this is kind of the effect I was going for. So I go back to basic, to disabled. There should only be several parts which are like sugary, so it's not everything is fully covered in sugar. And then what you can do as well, you can play up the sheen, which is something really cool, which I like a lot. So if you bring up sheen, you get some more wider parts, which kind of be like a dust pass or something which is like flour or something. And then what I actually did in the final render here, this is actually fully subsurface scattering and no diffuse at all. So we can just quickly try to mimic this. And now with a black shadow, you can actually see the sugar parts. It's really cool. So let's just bring up the scatter weight to 1, the scatter color to this green, which we had before. And the radius is a similar green, but a bit lighter. And then we change the mode to random walk. And then we really reduce the scale to 0.010 maybe. So this is almost diffuse, but it has some kind of waxy look to it. And you can definitely play around with the weight, maybe 0.8 to get some bit more like stronger diffuse in it. And this is kind of what I ended up doing for the Fruit Loops in the render below, which is this guy here. So definitely this is the technique I use to create the render. So if you like this, please write me on Patreon, whatever, if it's helping you or if not. And I would be happy to assist, and if it's a popular thing, I would create definitely more exclusive content for my patrons. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know how it goes, and see you definitely in the next video. Thank you guys. Goodbye.